Let's discuss two of the most well-known and difficult to achieve certifications in the field of finance. I'm talking about the CFA and the FRM. I have both of these certifications, so I'm going to give you guys some insight into my mind, and maybe that'll help you make the decision on which one of these you should pursue in the future. As for the content of the two tests, the CFA is very broad. It covers almost every area of finance, but I would say that it is most focused on just the field of investments, right? Asset management. That's really what the CFA is known for, even though it does cover other topics like corporate finance and financial reporting and analysis, but it is really focused on the asset management or investing side. As for the FRM, it's extremely niche. Almost all of the content is going to be related specifically to financial risk management, but just diving into different areas of that field, right? Like operational risk or market risk or quantitative risk or credit risk. Okay, and so there is a little bit of overlap, right? So in the last level of the CFA level 3, there's a whole section about financial risk management. So they do cover some of the same topics. As for the difficulty of these certifications, I'm going to go ahead and say that the CFA is slightly more difficult than the FRM. Now, I've had someone get mad at me in the past for saying that, so just hear me out. So CFA has 3 different levels, and they say on average people take 300 hours per level. From my experience and from talking to other people, I'm not sure that's so accurate. I think people take less hours on CFA level 1 because it's kind of just a refresher on, if you have a bachelor's degree in finance, that's a refresher on that. But then for CFA's level 2 and CFA level 3, those are pretty exhaustive tests that are very difficult, and I would say it's probably the average is higher than 300 hours per person. As for the FRM, they say that typically the average is 200 hours per test, and there's only 2 levels. So really, as far as time commitment goes, CFA is a substantially higher time commitment. As for the actual content that you're studying, I would say that the content you're looking at with the FRM is far more difficult and confusing. The math is much higher level and more difficult to understand than the CFA. But that is compensated for in that the minimum passing score on the FRM, so the percentage of problems that you need to get correct to pass a test, is much lower for the FRM reportedly than it is for the CFA. So the FRM is harder to study for, but easier to pass, if that makes sense. In the field of finance, you have this trade-off between risk and return. Now, I'm going to oversimplify and say that the CFA generally gears you towards jobs on the return side of things, and the FRM gears you towards jobs on the risk side of things. And yes, this is an oversimplification, but hear me out. So on the return side of things, if you're in asset management or investing, right? If you're on the return side, you're in this profit generation side. And so you're going to have expectations on you of outperforming some sort of index, right? So this is a very difficult job if you're going to try to outperform a market, and you have to work very hard to do that and know a lot of information to do that. But the compensation is also extremely high if you're one of the people who is successful within this regard. So I think of CFA and working on the return side or revenue generation side as being a job that can be extremely highly paid if you're good at it, but also one that you would expect to have terrible work-life balance, or maybe not terrible, but not good work-life balance, because you're really going to have to work very hard to do so. On the risk side of things, which is, the FRM is gearing you towards the risk side of things. I mean, it's still a difficult job, but you're not generally having to outperform some sort of index or the general market. You're really more measuring risk. So you're working with data. You're quantifying how much risk your firm or your financial services institution is taking. So I would say that as far as work-life balance goes, the FRM would probably be better, right? Because the expectations are slightly lower. But as far as salary, I would expect that you'd probably be paid slightly lower in the field of risk as well, because the expectations to outperform aren't as high. So these are two things to consider. And everybody has different views on life. How many hours do you want to work? How much do you want to get paid? There's no right answer. So think about what that means to you. If you're thinking about getting the CFA or the FRM, you should really be thinking primarily about which field of finance you want to work in. They both lend themselves to very different jobs. Now, the CFA Institute has conveniently provided us with a list of jobs that most CFAs have. So let's look at that right now. 13% of CFAs work as equity research analysts. 9% work as corporate financial analysts, 8% as accountants or auditors, 7% work as consultants, 5% work as risk analysts or managers. So there's some overlap there between FRM and CFA. 5% work as relationship managers and account managers, 5% as credit analysts, again, overlap with the FRM. And 5% work as portfolio managers. Now, portfolio manager is one of the highest jobs or the highest positions you could hope to achieve after you get the CFA, that you'd probably have to work your way up from one of these analyst positions to get there. As for the FRM, all of these jobs, for the most part, are going to be in the field of financial risk management, as you would have guessed from the name. So here's a few jobs you might get: risk analyst, risk manager, market risk analyst, quantitative risk analyst, credit risk analyst. And if you're achieving things and getting to the highest level of the field, then the highest position would be chief risk officer. I personally work in the market risk or quantitative market risk space. So with the FRM, you're most likely going to work in this area. Now, what type of personality traits or skills would make a person more likely to succeed as a CFA charter holder versus an FRM certification holder? So let's start off with the CFA. A lot of jobs in the CFA, right, if you're working in investments or asset management or equity research, is going to be based on making some sort of prediction with assets or markets or how things will perform in the future, and having to be better than the crowd on average, right? And so I think people who are going to perform well in this field are people who are very intuitive and have a lot of passion for what's going on in the world, they might have good views generally on what's happening in markets, or they might also just be good salespeople, good at talking with clients. So they might be able to convince people that they're the ones that they should really be trusting with their financial decisions or with their money. So maybe for CFA, it would be great for extroverted salesman type people, or really people with a broad view of the world that have specific views on how things may play out in the future and are able to guess at how things are going to play out more accurately than most other people. As for the FRM, this is going to be or the field of financial risk management in general is going to appeal to people who are good at math, good at programming, good at working with data. So a lot of the job is taking data and measuring it in a certain way, measuring it up to standards of what regulators want to see, right? So this is something that requires quantitative skills. technical skills with certain programming languages. You might have to know Python or SQL, or even be in Microsoft Excel, really advanced user. So this is going to be the more nuts and bolts of it, the more technical skill related type of field that might apply to people who are more introverted or just more quantitative in nature. Notoriety is something that you really need to pay attention to when it comes to certifications. Like, how many people know what this is? And this is something where I'm going to say that CFA has a huge advantage over FRM in, because almost everyone in the field of finance knows what the CFA is. As for the FRM, I've had a lot of people ask me, "Oh, what's the FRM?" Even people that work in the field of risk management. So one thing that isn't pleasant is to spend hundreds of hours getting some sort of certification and then people not knowing even what it is that work in that field. So I think as far as notoriety goes right now, CFA has a huge advantage and a huge sense of brand awareness. Now, I think FRM is definitely gaining popularity, but it's really not there yet. Also, I think FRM is quite a bit more popular in China and India. So if you're planning on living or working in China and India, then this might not really apply to you at all. But in the United States and Canada, it's certainly the case where the CFA is a lot more popular. Now, this last part is for the people that are wanting to do both the CFA and the FRM, and I'm going to give you a recommended order by which you should take these tests if you really want to do both. So one advantage of getting both the CFA and the FRM is that there's a ton of overlap between these tests. So I think if you want to minimize the amount of time you spend studying, then you're going to want to take the tests in the following order. So first, CFA level 1, second, CFA level 2, third, FRM part 1, fourth, CFA part 3, and 5, FRM part 2. And I'll tell you why that is. So CFA level 2 builds off of CFA level 1, and you're going to have a lot of information on risk management and all the broad general theories of finance. FRM also covers a lot of this stuff like derivatives, quantitative finance, like the stuff that's covered in CFAs level 1 and 2, and the broad theories of finance. So by the time you're taking FRM part 1, you'll have already seen most of the content in that test from CFAs level 1 and 2. And then for CFA level 3, there's a section in CFA level 3 that's called risk management. At least when I took it, that was about 10% of the overall exam. And having taken FRM part 1 right before that, I didn't need to study very much or very hard for the risk management section of CFA level 3 because I already took FRM part 1. And then a lot of the information in CFA level 3 will overlap with the information in FRM part 2. So a lot of this stuff is just based on it being fresh in your head, and the overlap between the two tests makes it a lot easier to actually take both test series. But keep in mind that all of these tests take a lot of hours, so this is a huge commitment to do both. And think about if it's really worth it to you to get both, or and think about, do you really want to end up like me or some of these other people where we have just an alphabet soup behind our name? So that's absolutely something to consider. Is it worth what's the return on the investment of your time? So anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel for more videos just like it. Thank you.